When I go for a run, a nice long run, I like to listen to podcasts, specifically comedy podcasts. And the podcast I've been listening to lately is Dax Shepard's Armchair Expert. I've never really known much about him as an actor or performer, but I discovered that he had this podcast, and I was interested in. He's got good guests, so I wanted to listen to them, and I've kind of been hooked ever since. Today I listened to one that was the first podcast episode they had, which they brought on an expert that wasn't an actor or a former colleague of his. And this woman, her name is Wendy Mogul, and she's a child psychologist. And she wrote a book called The Blessing of a Skinned Knee. And the gist of this whole episode is just talking about all of the different things that in today's culture, in today's society, that have influenced and changed the way that children are growing up. And I found it just tremendously interesting. I still have, maybe a few minutes left, to finish up the episode. But it's really just fascinating the way that she describes today's children. And I really find this to be true. The expectation is they always have to be happy. They always have to be fulfilled. They always have to be, given attention. And when that doesn't happen as they get older, they don't know how to cope with it. So they, turn to other things, and in extreme cases, drugs and alcohol, being a replacement for not having built-in coping mechanisms from growing up, and having to to deal with those things, because we as parents, in today's age, will do everything we can so that the kids don't experience pain and don't experience disappointment. If they get poor grades, we'll go to their teachers and negotiate, or what can they do to improve this grade, or and they're not self-advocating. They're just sitting back and letting their parents take the wheel. And then when they get older, they don't have that skill set to deal with maybe a boss who's a jerk, or something doesn't go their way. That's really interesting, because it's certainly something that I've observed, as a parent, and interacting with a lot of other parents, and hearing about other kids' experiences through my kids. So I can't recommend this enough. The podcast in general is just something that's really interesting to me, but this episode, and I'll put a link to it in the description, but it's, this woman, Wendy Mogul, child psychologist. If you're a parent, please listen to this episode, and I think you're going to find a lot of really good takeaways from this episode, because I certainly did. And now I'm going to be a perfect parent because I've heard this. So kudos to me.